Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So welcome today to Got Grass. My guest is West Coast mandolin player John Reischman, who doesn't really need an introduction, so I'm not going to give him one. So welcome, John, to Got Grass.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
I figure if anyone's listening to this, they know who you are. So,
well, you can't be too sure, but we'll hope for the best.
Right. So the first question I usually ask people is not a music question, and it is, if you had a day off and couldn't play music, how would you spend it? I put in the part about not playing music because when I ask musicians what they do on a day off, they always say play music. So
yeah.
If you weren't playing music, had a day off, just curious, like how you would relax or how you would choose to. Without the mandolin.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. I mean, I live in near Vancouver, BC, which is very close to, a lot of great outdoor spaces, hiking trails and mountains and the rivers and the ocean is there. So, but even at my house where I live in New Westminster, there's nice trails. So I'd probably spend at least part of it outside hiking around with maybe my wife, but usually my dog. Sometimes it's all of us. Sometimes I would, depending on the day, might spend it with my granddaughters if they're around. So there's usually something happening.
Nice, yeah. What's the weather out there today in British Columbia?
Well, it's a bit rainy today, which is, people think that's typical, but it's been really nice weather lately, although kind of unseasonably cool, but spring is in full bloom, which is great. And I don't mind the rain too much. It's nice.
Right. I'm going to change my tone here because I have been to Vancouver Island back in the 80s with for a house restoration conference out there.
Uh-huh.
They were talking a lot about wood and how it rots, and of course a lot of moisture out there, and there was a big issue, I guess, with wood buildings out in the Northwest. So it was fun. I went to Vancouver, Victoria, went to a big timber sawmill, and it was just amazing place.
It's beautiful. I mean, I moved here from Northern California it's been over 30 years now, and I still get back to California, to my old home, enough to not miss it too much, but it's really a wonderful place. British Columbia is a beautiful place to live.
I had never seen or smelled anything like those giant Douglas fir forests out there, and then there's the beautiful dark green and like icy ocean.
Yeah.
It was a very dramatic environment. Do you think that environment shapes you or has shaped you as a musician in any way?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, it is sort of, I mean, I grew up on the West Coast, in Mendocino County, which is pretty close to the ocean and the redwoods. So I guess I've always been exposed to that kind of terrain, and I just see this as an extension of it. I can't say for sure if it's shaped me, but I certainly appreciate it. And, I'm happy to live in this part of the world where there are big forests and wild spaces.
You ever take your mandolin and go sit under a big redwood or Douglas fir tree and just absorb the energy, kind of play like that?
Well, I think I probably have, but it's not, a regular thing.
Yeah. So did your family life growing up influence you into becoming a musician in a big way, or how was that?
Not well. I mean, I'm the youngest of five. I had three older sisters, and then the next youngest was my older brother. And my oldest sisters, they'd bring records home. I mean, they were quite a bit older than me, but I remember they had jazz records and maybe the Kingston Trio, but I remembered hearing the jazz stuff more than the folky stuff. And the youngest of the three sisters is a wonderful singer. She's took voice lessons with this teacher who lived in the town where I grew up, who had given lessons to Johnny Mathis. So she used to sing for a lot of weddings and was in kind of wedding bands as well. And I liked music a lot as a kid. And my older brother, I guess, was probably the biggest influence. And I took guitar lessons when I was a kid, but it didn't really stick. But we ended up keeping the guitar, and he kind of took it over and learned things from his friends. And then a few years later, when I was about 12, he started showing me, some of the chords and songs that he had learned. And he had a good friend, and they played music together and sang together. And I just, you know, I really loved that and wanted to join in with them. And when I finally discovered a mandolin, it was a way to kind of to join those guys.
I think I've seen a video of you and your brother guitar and mandolin duet on YouTube. Is that?
Could be. There's not a lot. I mean, we actually did play a gig last summer. We used to play a lot, 30, 40 years ago. We were in bands together, but that's fallen off in recent years. I think we may have done a little demo at Schoenberg's Guitars. We just stopped by there one time and they enlisted us to shoot some videos. So that could be it. I think that's out there.
Yeah, I think that might be the one I just
Yeah.
recently saw.
He's a pretty different musician than I am. I mean, he's great singer and wonderful rhythm guitar player. But I ended up focusing not so much on singing, but being an instrumentalist. So I think we complement each other.
Do you remember ever as a kid hearing a certain piece of music and just thinking, wow, that's really what I want to do or sound like, or that inspired you specifically?
I can't think of a specific piece of music, but I always liked music, and I was really taken by the Beatles. So many people were, and then got a little older, and like I said, my brother and his friend Gary were quite good musicians, and it's something I aspired to. But it was just that's all I was interested in. And once I started playing mandolin, there's I guess when early on I played guitar about equally as much as mandolin, but that's all I was really interested in. So, and where I grew up, I had the local uh, public television station had shows from San Francisco, and I was able to see different folk musicians. Pete Seeger's Rainbow Quest television show. So I was exposed to Doc Watson, and I guess the Stanley Brothers and the Greenbrier Boys were on there. And in addition to, the mainstream bluegrass exposure of the Beverly Hillbillies and the Andy Griffith Show. So there are no musicians that played that music really, except my brother and his friend, but they didn't, they were kind of guessing as well. But that television exposure, I think, was a big thing that set me on the path to what I've been doing for the rest of my life.
Hmm. Did your parents at any point push you towards getting a real job as opposed to a
Uh,
musicianship
yeah,
job?
well, it was my father died when I was very young, so I didn't grow up with him. But my mother would sort of gently suggest things, but I think she saw that I was talented and got to see the beginnings of my musical career. So she was pretty supportive.
At any point, did you have to decide between Nashville and British Columbia, or was it never an option to move to the Kentucky, Tennessee area for music?
Well, and yeah, I the where I lived in Northern California, where I grew up was California, about 100 miles north of San Francisco, and I ended up moving to the San Francisco Bay Area because I was hired by the band called the Good Old Persons, and that San Francisco music scene was really, really inspiring at that time because not only was there a great bluegrass scene, but also the Grisman Quintet started there, and I used to see them all the time, and they were around when I was playing, and which led to me being in proximity to Tony Rice. So when he started a band, I was there, and he knew of me, and I went and auditioned and got the gig. So I didn't really feel like I needed to move anywhere because it was such a vibrant scene with bluegrass and this new acoustic stuff. And also, a lot of swing music and Western swing. I played in a lot of different bands in addition to the Tony Rice unit and the Good Old Persons, just, casually because I was around, but it was a great scene. So there was one time I considered moving to Nashville, but the climate, I was going to say the climate suits my clothes and on the West Coast, and that's pretty much true.
Yeah,
I like
right.
I like to, live in the a natural environment that I feel comfortable in, and I didn't see that happening in Nashville so much. And I ended up moving to British Columbia because the woman we ended up getting married was living here, and so I moved north, and it was still the West Coast, still the same time zone, so it was an easy transition. So I did it not so much for a career, but for a life, a lifestyle change. And once I was here, I'd been touring up here enough that local musicians in Vancouver knew who I was, so I started getting gigs, and eventually started this band called the Jaybirds, and we've been doing that for 25 years now.
Right. Did you ever play in the Grisman band with Tony Rice, or was that like
No, no,
no.
I would love that band. I was really into the music and saw them many, many times. And David had always been very supportive of me, and he's he always introduces me as like the next mandolin player that Tony Rice played with after his band. But I'd sit in with him a little bit, but I was
Yeah,
never in the Grisman band.
right,
But I was in the first touring incarnation of what was called the Tony Rice unit. And
right,
that
right.
lasted for about 3 years. And then he changed directions because what I was doing with him was just instrumental music. And I guess around 1984 or 85, he moved back to the East Coast and started singing again,
Hmm.
which is a smart thing for him because, when I performed with him, people would always want to hear him sing, but he just was really into this instrumental jazzy stuff, which, was good for me because I liked it.
Right, right. So you have an album called New Time and Old Acoustic. Is that your most recent
Yeah.
album?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That my most recent solo record.
I
Yep.
was wondering how you came up with that name, what that means, if
Well,
anything.
it's just I find it funny because the music on it is, some of my original tunes were mostly my original tunes, and a lot of them sound somewhat like old time or influenced by old time music, but I've just, sort of casually called it new time music, which I think people have used that term. There's a lot of contemporary original tunes that have been made its way into the old time repertoire. Different old time musicians will write tunes, and people just pick up on them. They sound good. So I've had some success with that, and so I just call them new time. And then I wanted on this recording, I wanted to include some music that was sort of harken back to the music I played with Tony, which was kind of loosely called new acoustic music,
Hmm.
but it was 40 years ago. So I said, oh, it's not new anymore. It's old acoustic. So it was just kind of a play on words.
Yeah, so I mean, it could have been old time and new acoustic, I guess, would have been another way to call it, but I guess you made a little play on words there and made it
Yeah.
more of a
Well,
clever.
it kind of, describes what I do.
Right. So on that album, there's a really nice blend of veteran musicians and young players. Do you have any special memories of performing with that particular group? I know you had, I think Molly Tuttle was on there maybe, and
Yeah. Well,
some
that was
older
kind
folks.
of initially, I'd made a couple solo records, and this was going to be, and they included a lot of my original tunes. And I thought it would be good to record with some of these younger musicians that have kind of picked up on the music I've recorded, and like this tune Salt Spring, I recorded it with the Jaybirds in 2021, and it's taken off, to have a life of its own, and all these young musicians play it. So I thought, well, play with some of these younger musicians who I
Yeah.
really admire and have had some, maybe I've had a bit of an influence on him, at least maybe compositionally. I don't know. But anyway, I've known Molly since she was a little kid because her dad, Jack Tuttle, was in the Bay Area bluegrass scene. He was in a band called the Griffin Quintet, and we'd cross paths. And I still see him every summer at the Grass Valley Music Camp.
Hmm.
And then Max Schwartz is a great bass player who I ended up playing a few gigs with along with Bill Evans, and I was just very impressed with his ability because he's got a great rhythmic sense, but he's also got amazing chops. He's maybe primarily a jazz bassist, but he grew up playing bluegrass. He's a bluegrass banjo player as well. So I thought he'd be great. And Alex Hargraves grew up in Oregon, and I just thought he's just one of the best musicians, young or old, that I've ever heard, and really great guy. And they're all super nice people. So the first sessions were based on that lineup, and I there's a studio in California I wanted to use, and I thought that or I knew that I thought they would be home for Christmas, so I booked the studio for just after Christmas in 2019, and Molly was home, and we'd played music together a lot over the years, especially you know late teens, 2016, 17. She subbed for our guitar player in the Jaybirds one time. So I knew her and knew her family, and she was going to be out. So she was up for it. And Max's family was also from there. So he was going to be around, and Alex was back in Oregon. That's just a short flight down. So I just lined that up and recorded the first two tunes. And it was just, yeah, it was very, very fun to hear these fantastic musicians play these original tunes of mine.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how it feels to have written Salt Spring, which has really become, as you say, it's taken off and become like a major bluegrass standard here. And it's kind of a simple tune, but it's a beautiful melody with some minors and majors, and it's just yeah, it must feel. I don't know. I guess you never know when you write a tune if it's going to be a big. It's a big jam success, and a lot of jam sessions they play it. Although I have never played it at our
I know.
jam, but I'm going to do it this Sunday.
Oh yeah, well,
Love the
good,
song.
thank you. Yeah, it's just amazing to me that that tune has taken off like that. Which I like the tune a lot, but I don't know why that is any different than any other tune I've written. As far as I guess, I think the way it happened was I had wrote it in late 1999, and it was right after it was first tune I wrote after a bunch of tunes I wrote for a CD called Up in the Woods. First instrumental tune I introduced, and it's on our first record. And some folks heard us play it, and from Colorado at a music camp, and they took it to where they live. And I think Colorado is really where it spread out from. And I hear over the years, oh yeah, they're playing it in these jam sessions in Nashville or in Boston, and it just, I guess you're right, because it's a simple tune, melodically, but the chords set it off in a nice way. And I think it's accessible because it's simple, but it's also easy to embellish because the bare bones tune is like can be really simplified, but you can ornament it on a banjo with the surrounding notes and a roll, or on a fiddle with double stops. And the mandolin technique I use kind of imitates a frailing sound. So I don't know. I'm happy people like it.
Yeah, especially I think the B part, which is very straightforward. I mean, it's not even really clear from the tune what the melody is. The chords kind of set it up, and you can really go anywhere with it
Yeah.
on the B part. It's interesting.
Well, it's the way I wrote the tune is the A part came to me when I was at a friend's house on Salt Spring Island, and they had this really nice old Martin 0018. I think that's what it was. And I was just playing that guitar, and it just sounded so resonant. And I was playing it out of a D position, and that melody just popped out. And so I remembered it. I don't think I recorded it. I think I just remembered the tune, and then played around with different chords to go with it that would set off the melody in a pleasing way. And then the B part, that was just a little riff that I would play when I pick up the mandolin, which is kind of based on that frailing thing where you play the main melody is on the downbeat, and then right after that you play a down up as kind of just a drone
Hmm.
on the higher strings. And so I thought, well, I'm a mandolin player. I should play it on mandolin. So I'm going to move it to the key of A, which is nice on the mandolin. And then I had this other little thing I did, and I just stuck it together, and it was the
Yeah,
tune.
there it
But
is.
the basic melody is just that ascending um, note on the D string of the mandolin that goes from F sharp to G sharp to D to A, and
Mhm.
but you had the extra ornamented chimey drone notes, and that's what sets it off.
When you come up with a great or a clever or a memorable melody, do you ever worry you're gonna forget it? You get
Yeah,
to write it
yeah,
down.
yeah. I have forgotten a few. So, I mean, what I used to do is, I'd have some kind of recording device if I was, home. But if I was out in the world, a lot of these tunes have come to me just while I was walking. So I would go to a payphone and call the home answering machine and kind of sing the tune into it as best I could, so I could
Wow,
remember it. Yeah, that's
that's clever.
that's true. Yeah,
It
I
shows you
mean,
the technology, I guess, has changed a bit since then, right?
yes, yes. So now my iPhone is filled with little voice memos full of bits of tunes.
Yeah. So talking about bands, your band, the Jaybirds, is a just a wonderful group. I mean, so clean, inventive, and then the vocal blend is just phew, great vocals. How did that group start? Was that something you pulled together with friends, or?
Yeah, yeah, that came together. I put it together in 1999, and it was the CD I mentioned called Up in the Woods. I booked a couple shows as sort of CD release shows, and so I put together a band to feature that. And Nick Hornbuckle is the banjo player, and he was someone I'd met after I moved north, and we'd been in a few bands, and I invited him to be on the recording. So he was living in Seattle, so I thought that would be easy enough to get him on banjo. And Trisha Gagnon, the vocalist and bass player, she is someone who's lived near Vancouver, and she was in a local band called Tumbleweed, and I ended up playing a few shows with them, and then some casual shows with she and the guitar player or slash banjo player from that band named Chris Stevens. And we'd play some trio shows. And so I was getting to know some of the musicians. So I got Nick and Trisha, uh, and then for the first shows, it was this guy, Chris Stevens, who had played with Trisha. And then Greg Spatz is someone who I knew from California, and he's uh, teaches creative writing, so he's had different gigs all over the country, teaching. But he was living in Spokane at that time, which is not really close, but I just thought, yeah, he'd be good fiddle player. So we played these shows, and it just seemed like it was a good thing to keep it going, but add vocals since Trisha was such a great vocal, and different
Mhm.
guitar players. Were on board early on, but we settled on Jim Nunley, who I knew from California, great guitar player and wonderful singer. And he was in the band for 16 years. And then I guess in 2016 or 17, Patrick Sauber came on, who's a multi-instrumentalist. Uh, and he's playing guitar with us, but he's played banjo with a lot of folks, Peter Rowan and Tim O'Brien, Laurie Lewis. And I think he played some mandolin with Pete Rowan. So it's been this same lineup for a good long while, and we're just working on a new recording right now. But I really love the band a lot because, it's called John Reischman and the Jaybirds, but that was primarily because, I started it to perform my tunes, and I was the most known person, so it seemed to make sense. And I kind of wanted to have say over the material. But the presentation, I mean, you've heard us, it's not really me in a backup band. It's like
No.
I wanted to be in a bluegrass band. So I want to be featured at least some of the time, but not all the time. So it's a pretty democratic presentation where everyone gets featured. Patrick's singing a lot more lead now, which is great because I like having two different lead vocalists. And Trisha's great. they're all great and they're good friends. So it's been really wonderful thing to be a part of for all this time.
Yeah, yes, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, there are some bands in bluegrass that have stayed together for, 20, 25, or 30 years, but that's a long time to keep one thing going.
Yeah, with just
Really?
one personnel change, really,
Yeah.
because Greg and Trisha and Nick were all there from day one. It's just the guitar slot has been a little bit revolving, but not too bad. I mean, 16 years with Jim is a long time, and now 7 years with Patrick. That's a long time in bluegrass.
It is. Um, so on these interviews, somehow we always end up talking about Tony Rice, I guess we
Yeah,
have a little bit. And he played here at Guitar Town 4 times, I think, back in the late 2008.
yeah. I think that's how I became aware of you. I was following where he was playing and saw, oh, Guitar Town.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah, well, my daughter came up with a name, so that was but Tony's always been my musical hero, and I think that next to Bill Monroe, he's really the primary influence on bluegrass music. Not just the guitar playing, but the singing, his rhythm and tone, everything about him, his band members, and a certain charisma and image that he had that to me were all like such key parts of the whole. Do you have any thoughts on him and like how his I don't know. I noticed one thing that people who played with Tony always seemed to play their very best when they played with Tony. Do you?
Well, yeah, I would agree. I mean, I felt like I guess I've said this before, but playing with him playing soloing with him playing guitar just made you automatically sound better. And the combination of Tony and Todd Phillips, that was what I got to experience. And I was pretty young, I hadn't been playing that long when I was in that band. And I think it just elevated me uh, to be able to play. I don't know how to say this exactly, but beyond maybe I would have been playing if I had not joined that band. It was just playing in that context. Well, I know for one thing, it really encouraged me to practice a lot. I really, I practice his tunes and just technique and really, because, if I was going to go on stage with him, I didn't want to embarrass myself.
Right.
But just the way he played just made you sound better, is rhythmically so strong and so, excuse me one second. Just a great, um, palette to play over. And he was encouraging. He was really a great guy. Hey, Chris, I just have to grab a cough drop. I get this cough in my
Okay,
throat.
I'm gonna pause this for 1 second. And so, do you feel conversely that you guys brought out the best in Tony when you played with him? Was it like a mutual thing? Was it he like bouncing the ideas back and forth and playing better and better? How was that vibe?
Well, I don't know, that's hard for me to say. I don't know that. I mean, because like I said, Tony, I was pretty, green as a musician. I mean, I think he appreciated the fact that I had these certain essentials that he looked for of tone and timing and that kind of thing. Um, but I think probably the folks that brought out the best in him were probably Sam Bush and those folks, Jerry Douglas, those great musicians that he had this, long-standing relationship with,
Yeah.
more so than myself. But I think he was happy to have a musician, in me that liked and was open to the music he wrote and performed, and was still developing too. I think he saw me as someone who had some stuff together and then the potential to improve, which hopefully I did. Think I did.
When you were with Tony Rice early on, were you guys touring as a band, or were you mostly just recording and
We
like
toured a
kind
bit. We toured, we'd play in the Bay Area. We played the Great American Music Hall, a lot of the same places where the Grissman Quintet played. And we'd go down to Southern California and played McCabe's there and up the coast. And we did have one sort of national tour where we played, I think we went from Salt Lake to Houston to North Carolina, around Chapel Hill, and then up to New York City, and then up into New England. And that was over a couple of weeks, I think. But it was just, not financially feasible to continue that kind of a thing,
Yeah,
just because of the expensive travel like that.
sure. So in the unit back in those days, was Wyatt in the band? Was you Tony Wyatt at that point, or was
Well, it ended up with Wyatt, but it started out with, Tony and David parted ways, but I think Todd Phillips was always on board to play bass in Tony's new endeavor. But Todd had moved out of the Bay Area for a period of time. He was spending time in Washington State on Whidbey Island. And this is like in 1980. And around February of 80, I got the call that Tony Reischman wanted to get a hold of me. And so I went over and got the recordings, and he said, this is what I want to do. So I went home, learned some of the tunes, went back a couple of weeks later, and he was great. He just said, "Oh, well, I had no idea you could play like that. I'm not looking for another mandolin player now." And so it was going to be Todd and Tony and myself. And he took him a long time to find a fiddle player he wanted to use. And I think Daryl Anger and Mike Marshall had met Fred Carpenter
yeah,
at the Weezer fiddle contest, maybe, and thought he'd be a good person to audition. And Fred was a great, strong player. He was a contest fiddler primarily, but he had good technique and great ability. So he hired Fred, and the initial band that played on that record called Still Inside, which is part of it was released later on the CD called Devlin. That was the band. And then for the next recording called Backwaters, I think he had seen his brother Wyatt get better and better. And I think Wyatt had played on a few cuts on Church Street Blues. And so he got Wyatt to come out and play rhythm guitar. And then I guess by the end of my time with Tony and that instrumental version, Fred had moved on to something else, and Wyatt came in as the fourth member, playing primarily rhythm guitar, although Tony would feature him on some tunes like that Clarence White, performed, because Wyatt was really good at that stuff. So
right? Yeah, Wyatt is on my list. He's a hard person to like Tony was. I think tends to be a private person, and I've met him quite a few times with Tony, but I'd love to get his take without being too personal or prying about his relationship with Tony and learning the guitar and that whole dynamic, which is so fascinating to me, that he could bring in this young kid as his younger brother was and have him fit right in and freed up Tony to play a lot of great stuff, because Wyatt plays the rhythm like Tony does. So it's like, wow.
yeah, he's amazingly good. I mean, it was really cool. There was a Grisman Quintet reunion a few years ago. Sure if Tony was still living at the time. I think he was, but he wasn't performing. And this was at Rocky Grass, and they asked Wyatt to come in and play guitar, which was really cool because he's got that, Rice chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did talk to Todd Phillips, one of my earlier podcasts, and he was saying that when he met Tony out there, and Todd was playing, I guess, an electric bass, and for some lousy acoustic bass, and Tony said, "We got to get you a good bass, man." So they found some bass in a want-ad, and they went and bought it. I guess maybe Tony chipped in, or I don't know how they got it. But then I heard also that Tony also influenced you into getting your mandolin. Is that another story?
Well, yeah. I mean, I had been playing with Tony for about a year, and the opportunity came up to buy this one, or this mandolin came up for sale, this Lloyd Loar, and I called him right away after I played it, and I always say this, hey, Tony, I just played a Loar, and he says, I always want to imitate his later voice, but like, oh yeah, man, you gotta get it. But he didn't talk like that then.
No.
He just said, you got to get it, and so I just did everything I could to get the money together and was able to purchase it. I mean, I would have pursued it even if Tony hadn't have said so. Like, I didn't have to because of Tony. It was just
Right.
a fantastic mandolin, and it's what all the mandolin players dream of. And there was one right there in Oakland, California, near where I lived. That so yeah, he was happy I got the Loar though.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, a lot of musicians, I know, especially guitarists, because I play guitar, are always trying new guitars, buying new guitars, constantly just trying to get a different sound or something else. Are you that way about mandolin? Or are you pretty just happy with your lore and that's the end of it?
I'm pretty happy with my lore, although I love checking out other mandolins, and I have other mandolins. I've had a lot in the past 20 years, but right now, in addition to the lore, I have a beautiful Michael Hayden F5, and I've had a relationship with Michael for a long time. He's from British Columbia and a great builder. And I when I first taught at the Kaufman guitar camp and mandolin camp, I said, You have a mandolin you want me to take down there to, people should know about these." So I think he ended up selling a lot of mandolins because I brought that one down there and was sort of associated with his mandolins. And this one he made for me is just a beautiful instrument. And then in addition to that, I have a Gilchrist Model 1, which is kind of based on a Gibson A Junior, very simply adorned,
Mhm.
but it's a Gilchrist, so it's automatically got this great craftsmanship, and he uses a lot nicer woods than probably Gibson would have on their A Junior at the time. And I'd known Steve for a long time. I actually ordered one in maybe it was, what year would that been? 1981, before I got the lore, because I was looking for a new mandolin and I had met him. He was on his way back to Australia after spending a year at Groons, and ordered one. And then I got the lore and I couldn't afford anything anymore. So, but he was very gracious about it. And I had a buyer on the line, and he wasn't really known as well, not nearly as known back then.
Mhm.
But anyway, he was able to still sell the mandolin, and we'd stayed friends over the years. And so I'm finally really happy to own a Gilchrist mandolin. And
Nice.
it's a round sound hole mandolin, so it's got a different sound. So it's nice
Right.
to have that.
Does the sound and clarity and overtones and stuff of your Gibson Lloyd Loar, does that influence your playing style like to a degree? Does it just like bring out certain notes or
I
feelings
think so.
or
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a very inspiring instrument, and I think it's the sound has. I think we've sort of developed together because I'm sure you've heard people say a player can play a tone into a new instrument or a existing instrument, and I think that's somewhat happened with that instrument because I play it with a certain attack, and also when I first got it, it had the original fingerboard on it, and those were notoriously um, not the fingerboards. The frets were a little off. They didn't note in tune. So, and I was used to a mandolin with quite a radius board, so I thought, well, I got to change this. So the person who did it did a fantastic job. So that may contribute to the sound of that instrument, and also, the sound of the instrument inspires me, and I think the way I've played it over these years has sort of informed the tone that it's taken on too. Not to say I'm strictly responsible for the sound of this Lloyd Loar because they're great instruments, but you know that the way someone plays an instrument has an effect on it over time.
when you sit down with the lore and you're just practicing or noodling around, does it ever not sound great? Like, do you ever say, "Well,
Yeah,
what's going
there's
on today?"
sometimes I think it sounds better than others. Like I used to do this thing where I had a Volvo station wagon, and they had those little compartments in the back, kind of a storage space, and I'd travel with it in there, and that was right over the rear axle. And it seemed like whenever I took the mandolin out of the case after a trip, and that it had been vibrating in there and just sounded already alive and warmed up. So I noticed that,
Interesting.
and sometimes it sounds maybe a little sleepy, but mostly it always sounds good.
Yeah. That
I
lead.
did have one issue a few years ago where I went from the West Coast where, there's a lot of moisture in the air to, you know, east of the Rockies where it's quite dry, and the action dropped, and it was buzzy, and so I raised the action, and it didn't buzz, but it didn't sound quite as good. I mean, it still sounded good, but it didn't quite sound as warm and resonant to me somehow. And it was kind of driving me nuts. And it took several months to get it so I could lower the action. I think Lynn Dudenbostel did a little truss rod adjustment. And at the time I was back in East Tennessee where it's quite humid, and it seemed to recover.
Right. Interesting. I was going to ask this question, kind of leads naturally to this question, but how much of a good performer's sound is the instrument and how much is the player? And I guess the reason I asked this was I was thinking back, I heard the great jazz pianist Teddy Wilson, from Benny Goodman's band and so forth. Back in the 70s, near the end of his career, he was playing a pretty shitty upright piano in a bar in Connecticut, solo, and just sounded amazing because it was Teddy Wilson. And he just,
Yeah.
it was not obviously the instrument he was used to playing. It probably was out of tune, maybe missing a key or so, but his sound came through it so naturally, it didn't really matter what he was playing. Do you, any comments on that? Or
Yeah.
I'll put it this way, could you play just as well on a $200 mandolin as you do on your Loar if you had to?
Well, it depends on the $200 mandolin. I guess it depends on the musician and the instrument.
Yeah.
But I think, an instrument has to be, of reasonable quality in order to do anything with it. And I remember playing a $500 Kentucky that just happened to sound amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think generally it's kind of I've always described it as a partnership between me and the mandolin. And now that this tone is something that people have remarked about my own playing, and I didn't really conceive of it too much early on. I just wanted to play in a way that sounded right to me and sounded full and clean and clear. And people would remark on saying, you have good tone. And I just thought, how else would I sound? I mean, this is the way I want to sound. So, but, so I'm known for getting the certain tone quality, and I think it comes across when I play other mandolins as well. Maybe not to the degree when I play my Gibson, but it's there. So I think it's in the player and the instrument. So for me, it's a partnership, I'd say.
Yeah.
And playing the same mandolin for over 40 years has been great.
I guess people say that certain musicians, when you hear one or two notes, you automatically know right away who it is. They have a certain, whatever it is, attack, or I don't know if it's tone, but do you think that's true? I mean, you are known for a very crisp, clean, beautiful tone on your mandolin, always have been, and you have it. Is that just, I guess that's just the way you approach it, right? It just has a sound that's you.
Yeah, it's the way I hear it in my head. I mean, I remember doing an interview. It was people contributed questions on the Mandolin Cafe, and one question was, "What's the secret to achieving good tone?" And I think being able to hear good tone is the first thing. I mean, and the sound I get is the sound I hear as good tone. Now some people might like a brighter tone. Like there's different traditions of mandolin, like in say the Shoro players, those mandolins sound quite bright to me. But I've played those instruments, or at least a few of those, and they can sound deep as well. It's just the tone that sounds right for the player, or the style, I guess. And the way I play, even in bluegrass, a lot of these great traditional players get more of a throaty, treblier, more trebly sound, which is a great sound. And I like that quite a bit, but that's a bit different than what I'm going for, which is maybe more darker sound.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. You put that in a nice way. I've never heard it phrased that way, that you hear a sound and you're trying to get the instrument to sound like you hear it, rather than the opposite way around, where you're going with the instrument. You have a tone in mind that you want to try to get.
Yeah.
You're trying to pull it out of the instrument however you can.
And this just happens that this Lloyd Loar is a fantastic instrument, and I'm able to get that. And that was what I was going for on mandolins I had before I got the Lloyd Loar. But maybe if someone else, would have gotten that mandolin, 40 years ago, it would have taken on different tonal attributes because that player had been focusing on a different sort of sound.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to David Greer recently on one of these podcasts, and of course, he's very outspoken. And I said, when you practice, he goes, I don't practice. I just play. I never practice in my life. I don't look at it as practice. I just sit down, I start playing, and that's how I've done my entire life since I was a little kid. How do you look at practice? If you do still practice, you look at practice as trying to kind of learn something new, or something just might come up as you're noodling around, or do you try to work on existing skills, or what is practice like for you?
Well, when I practice, I'm trying to, keep my technique up, and a lot of times it is learning something new, or just like David says, just playing. But when I do practice, I mostly work on my little finger, do like closed position exercises,
Hmm.
and try and keep that up. And I'll work on speed too. As I've gotten older, the speed I'm able to play, the speed that I was able to play with has diminished. So, and I mean, I still can play fast by a lot of standards, but I can't play quite like I used to.
Yeah.
So I'll work on that. And but yeah, the thing with David's describing, that's how I was when I was young. Like I wasn't practicing scales. I was learning tunes and just playing, and always having the instrument in my hands. And I just kind of stopped that. But David's continued that way because he's always playing. He's always jamming, always ready to play a tune.
Right. So when you're practicing or just playing by yourself, do you come up with things and go, "Whoa, that's pretty cool. I never played that before." Um, and then again, how do you remember that little riff or lick or something, or maybe you don't?
Yeah, it doesn't happen as frequently as it used to. Not that it happened all that frequently, but mostly, you know, it's not quite as common.
Is there any particular thing you've learned recently on the mandolin you could a little tip you could send out to our listeners? Any
Oh
little
yeah,
something?
let's see. That's a good question, which I don't have a ready answer for. Um, yeah, I think it's just a matter of, spending time with the instrument. You spend a lot of time with your instrument, and things will reveal themselves or their selves. Little ideas, little, thinking about playing a phrase in a different position or in a different key. That's helpful. I've just been working on this new tune or series of tunes, and I thought, okay, this is gonna be in G minor, and was pursuing it, and then there was a related tune in B flat, but then ultimately came to realize it's going to be better if I change the key. And once I did that, to E minor and G major, which, obviously easier, but also the open strings are more accessible. And these particular melodies just seem to um, come across better in the new key. So just spending a lot of time, and practicing. If you are going to practice, try and practice every day, even if it's for, half hour. It's better to do it consistently in a routine than just playing for 6 hours on the weekend and then not touching it till the next weekend.
One other thing that Todd Phillips mentioned, kind of a funny story he told. He was talking with David Grisman pretty recently, and he said, Todd, I've kind of boxed myself into a corner here because I wrote all these songs that are really fast and I can't play them anymore at the speed. He said, I just have to slow them down and not worry about it. It's just, it's physical, right? You just learn
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
after.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's it's just a fact of life. Things are going to change a little bit, but I draw inspiration from the musicians I used to see when I was young, like Stefan Grappelli. I was fortunate to see him several times. Where I'm not sure how old he was at the time, but I think older than I am now, and he still played great. And like the Argentine composer Astor Piazzolla, he didn't achieve great fame till he was in his 60s. So these older musicians are inspirational to me.
Right. I do hear musicians in bluegrass that I talk to, but I guess in every field of music, it's the same as that, as you get older, in theory, you're playing maybe less notes, but better notes. I mean, Todd certainly said that with bass. Said, yeah, I can't play, I can play like I played back in the early TRU days, but I think I play better because I leave more stuff out, kind of.
I
Uh,
I kind of feel the same way. Like I can't play as fast, but I like what I play better. That's pretty much holds true for myself as well.
yeah. I remember talking with Tony Rice at one of his concerts. We were talking about Oscar Peterson, who was one of his favorite jazz players and my
Yeah.
favorite jazz pianist. And I was thinking that both Tony and Oscar had certain melodic and rhythmic phrases that they repeat often in their playing in different contexts. Do you think all musicians do that, or are there any musicians that can just create completely original stuff on the spot without resorting to like riffs and things that they've got under complete control?
I think definitely there's musicians who just, have this freedom in their playing, like Andy Statman.
Hmm.
And I think Jake Jolliffe is kind of like that. He's kind of amazingly great young mandolin player, and
Right.
Chris Thile probably as well. They can just play whatever off the top of their head. I mean, maybe not whatever, but it's not relying on the same vocabulary or cliches or licks or whatever all the time. I mean, I think all musicians have that. I certainly do. And I know what you mean about Tony. A lot of these phrases and things would come up, but the way he would execute them is what makes the difference.
Right. I'm thinking that every performer has certain limitations in their playing. How much do you think your playing or one's playing style is determined by your limitations? I don't mean just you, but anybody. I mean, does that kind of help um, determine how you play by what you can't play? Or
I think so. I mean, if I had, kind of unlimited technique, it might not, I don't, who knows what it would be, but I can't play certain things, so I don't.
yep, right.
There's this one tune of Tony's called Gasology that was one of the tunes we used to play way back in the day.
Sure. Yep.
And it's really a finger buster in the left hand. In the right hand, it's kind of like a fiddle tune, just steady up and down picking.
Hmm.
So that's okay. But this left hand where it goes up to the 12th fret and all these position shifts, and I'll still play that when I sit down to practice. Just as I used to do it just in case I ever played with Tony again, but now I
Right.
just do it because it's great for my hand and it's a cool tune.
Do you ever get lost in a piece when you're playing with a band or a trio or something? You're doing the solo and you just kind of lose your place, and how do you find your way back if that happens?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I probably don't do it. I mean, that's definitely happened. What I thought were talking about was just losing yourself and not thinking and just being removed, kind of almost like an out of body experience. And I've experienced that. But oh yeah, I've definitely made mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, I
And
guess I guess your question was a more interesting one than mine. Like
well,
you really get lost in the music to the point where you don't even know what's going on. You just
yeah, I've had there's these certain tunes we performed and like the tune is over and like, oh, where was I just then?
hmm.
Which is great. It doesn't happen that often, but it has happened.
Yeah. I have a feeling that you are a much better singer than most people realize. Do you like singing lead in a band, or do you prefer being a harmony singer? Or what is your view on
Uh,
on your
well,
singing?
I appreciate you saying that, and I do. I definitely like singing harmony, especially with Patrick and Trisha. They're both wonderful singers, and I've never liked my own lead voice, so I've just never pursued it. I'll sing lead in a duet situation where someone's singing tenor to me, and I'll be sing the lead, but I just feel like I need someone else's voice to sort of mask whatever I'm doing. And but I think, I'm pretty good at harmony singing. People have said I blend well, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the the things about your band, the Jaybirds, that really is so noticeable is the harmonies. I mean, you have great lead singers in the band, but I mean the vocal blend of three or four voices in there is just, to me, is one of the things that really makes
Oh,
great
that's great.
music.
I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's really nice.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about back to the Jaybirds, I mean, I think we have a band sound, which is something I always aspired to. I remember the original Nashville Bluegrass Band. They had such a unique and great band sound. It was just inspiring. And even when it changed a bit, uh, when I guess it was still Alan and Pat singing lead, but Roland had come on mandolin and Gene LeBay on bass. Um, I guess Stewart was still there. So, but that was that, that rhythm section is pretty different, but they still had a unique band sound. And,
Yeah.
that's what I think we have because, we have a female lead vocalist whose range is sort of low, like a alto or contralto maybe.
Hmm.
And then Jim and Patrick both have male voices that are quite high. So that's a nice juxtaposition. And then Nick, who plays banjo, plays unlike anyone else. He's great banjo player, and um, he only uses two fingers rather than three. It's not he was a Scruggs style player, but somehow his middle finger was not performing up to snuff, according to him, and he just started playing everything with two fingers. So that
Hmm.
automatically sets him apart from most other banjo players. Plus, he's a creative musician. He writes great tunes and, he's got his own thing going on.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed when you guys played here back in that whenever you played here back at that video store
Hmm.
was his banjo style. I looked twice. I looked three times. I said, wait a minute, what is going on here? He's only using two fingers. And yeah, he does have a unique sound, but it doesn't feel at all limited by his fingers. It's just he just has a great technique and approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's really, really unique and really great.
So you've played with lots of different musicians over the years. Was there any special occasion you can recall when you just felt like it was a life-changing or totally magical moment, or is that too hard a question to throw
Well,
at you?
yeah, I don't know. I've been fortunate, like Bruce Molsky and I are friends, and he's recorded with me, and whenever we're at a music camp together, we'll do some duet playing, which is always really exciting to me. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean,
Hmm. Well, let me ask you another difficult question. Is there anybody in music that you would enjoy playing a duet with, let's say, but haven't had a chance to do yet? Any special, like somebody on your wish list you'd like to sit down with and record or perform?
um, that's another good question. I mean, that's partly what I achieve, like on this new time and old acoustic. That's a big cast of characters, and so I partly I think of people who I have played with and enjoy playing with, but also people that I'd like to play with, like Chris Eldridge. Say, he we were at a music camp and played together, and he knows all that old Tony stuff, and he's a great guy and a great player. So I wanted to do something with him and Todd, who, I know from the old days, who I've been good friends with, since I started playing with Tony. And I guess what I'm thinking of is on a previous recording, I was almost had a reunion of Tony and Todd and I for it, and Tony, we were, corresponding. Tony was really into it, but then when it came time to schedule it, he kind of there was radio silence, and I think this kind of coincided when he really stopped playing and just couldn't was really struggling with that. But he was always really, and I said, okay, we'll reschedule. And he says, oh yeah, that'll be great. We'll do it. But then it never happened. So
Yeah.
getting Chris and Tony on this one tune on the recording, or a couple tunes, was kind of, because I know Chris, he doesn't sound like Tony, but he's very inspired by Tony. And I thought that would be a good connection. So,
Yeah. Just FYI, when I asked Missy Range the same question about who she would love to perform with, and she said Jimmy Martin. And I asked Rhonda Vincent, and she said James Taylor. So does that give you? I mean, obviously there's a wide range of people. You've probably played with a lot of them. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to play with some, I mean, I've been lucky because I've been around a long time. And I remember, I've had occasion to play music in an informal situation with Bill Monroe. I remember at Paul's Saloon, the Bluegrass Bar in San Francisco, the Good Old Persons were on stage, and Bill Monroe had played at the Great American Music Hall that night. And during our fourth set, who should walk in the door but David Grisman and Frank Wakefield and Bill Monroe? And I was on stage playing mandolin, which was pretty daunting, but we ended up just jamming around the tables afterwards. So that was pretty great.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
I have that you mentioned James Taylor. I love James Taylor, and we listened to him a lot when I was not really even a bluegrass player. And I thought this would be cool to get him to just play guitar on something.
Yeah. Actually, my next interview after you, which is going to be, I think, next week, is going to be Mike Compton. So,
cool.
Nashville Bluegrass Band, and he has obviously a very different take on mandolin playing and a very different reputation than you. So it'll be interesting to see what he says about all this stuff. Did you stay in touch with Tony after the band, like through the years? I mean, I know he was a hard person to he wasn't much of a communicator in lots of ways, I guess. And I think he was always friendly and liked people, but just would sometimes not respond to anybody for years.
Not too frequently. I mean, we'd see each other on occasion at festivals like at Merle Fest, or he came out for Wintergrass, and he was always super friendly and always have the most positive things to say. And in our texting communication about the potential recording, he was just very effusive and, just a great guy. And I think maybe after that communication about recording, I'd just reach out and wish him a happy birthday and wouldn't hear anything. But I think he was kind of maybe spiraling downwards at that time and just not communicating with anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a weird ending to his life. But then again, I guess maybe considering his life, it wasn't that weird after all. He just kind of died, and that was it. He was gone. Maybe the way he would have wanted it. No fuss and fanfare. Just get me out of here.
Just gone. I mean, people were able to witness him giving the speech at IBMA that year, which was quite inspiring and remarkable. Mm-hmm. So that was great. But it's too bad he struggled the way he did.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite memory of him playing here was I heard that he liked. I was always interested in, when I first started, I would make meals for the band. I would make all kinds of stuff when we did at these bigger shows. And I heard that Tony liked lobster rolls. So one concert, I made all these homemade lobster rolls. And I tell you, I never felt happier when he took a bite of that thing. His face just lit up. He goes, "Man, this is some fucking good shit." And I was like, it was, that was the high point of my life.
That's great. Good for you.
Happy with the lobster roll.
Yeah, cool.
I remember we had one show here. It was a tribute fundraiser for Tony, and we had Chris Eldridge and Josh Williams, among others, playing. And they got up on stage and started doing Gold Rush together, two guitars, and note for note, and then harmony note for note. They were both playing. It was just like a magical moment because they both obviously grew up and knew every single lick he ever played.
Right.
And it was so fun to see him, and because they were getting off on it too. They were looking at each other like, "Is this really happening? We're really doing this thing note for note." But it was
that's pretty cool.
Nice memories.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of wind down here with a non-musical question, which usually are harder. What would people be surprised to learn about you? I mean, people know about your musical life to a degree, and your West Coast home in British Columbia. Is there something about you that the public doesn't know about that you'd like to share here? Just, I don't know, a hobby or a quirk or anything that people would not know about John Reischman?
That's a good question.
I know. Most people don't know how to answer it, I've noticed.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
You kind of entered it early on when you said, living where you live. I mean, just going out in nature and wandering around would be probably an amazing way to spend any time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I find that really inspiring being in green spaces, and I really like my life. I'm trying to not be gone too much, but I have to be gone to exist. And I like every year I teach a lot of the same camps, and I really like that. But I think last year, maybe after being isolated during the pandemic, I like overbooked myself.
Mm.
So now I try to really be aware of not being gone too much, although it's hard to turn things work down. So it's a tough decision. But this year looks more reasonable, where I'm getting ready to go to the Montana Fiddle Camp and the California Bluegrass Association camp at Grass Valley,
Mm.
and then have some gigs, and playing Rocky Grass next month, or no, in July. And a lot of good shows that I'm happy about. But also I can see a lot of time being at home, because I love my home life. My wife and I have this, wonderful dog and cat that
Yeah.
our life kind of revolves around. And then I have two granddaughters who live close by, and two grown daughters who are close by. So family life is important to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, just, and, good food, being able to, where I live, there's lots of different cuisines, I can have if I want. So
Hmm. I remember I first met Todd Phillips here because he played we had what I called a Manzanita concert, which was kind of like a celebration of Manzanita and Bluegrass Album Band, and he was the bass player for the group. And we were talking about house renovation, because my career was in restoring old houses. He said, "Oh
yeah.
yeah, I have a bungalow out here. I I work on it." So I recently talked to him about it. I said, "How's your house coming?" He said, "Well, I'm either I have money, but I'm too busy to work on it, or I have time to work on it, but I have no money." So he said it
That
goes very
sounds
slowly.
yeah. Todd, he is an incredibly talented guy. He comes from a long line of hardwood floor installers, so he's a really good
Wow.
woodworker, and he's done his own
Mm.
work on his instruments and built mandolins and customized basses. And I remember when we used to be roommates at one time, and he he got a heavy sewing machine and sewed a case cover together.
Wow.
So yeah, he can get really, really taken up in a project. Sometimes it takes him
Yeah.
a long time to finish it, but he's a super talented guy.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say to I would say, not a million listeners, but we have some listeners. Any last point you'd like to make before we wrap things up? I mean, we've covered a lot today, so
Well, I'm just looking forward to, continuing what I do for a good long while. And I'm mostly performing in the West, but have some trips to the East coming up. And stay tuned for a new Jaybirds recording in the early new year. And I think that's probably plenty.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you, John Reischman,
Oh
for
yeah,
chatting
Chris,
today.
thanks. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
it
so
was
much.
great, great conversation, and covered a lot of interesting stuff. And I hope to see you back here in Connecticut someday with your band, or
Yes.
some reiteration of your band. That would be great. You're always
Y-
welcome.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Okay, take
All
it
right.
easy. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.